My sister's engagement party was the kind of event that my mother had been planning since before my sister even had a boyfriend. The venue was a private dining room at a steakhouse in Newport Beach that my parents had rented for the evening. White linen tablecloths, low floral centerpieces in blush and ivory, name cards in gold calligraphy. My mother had spent 3 weeks on the seating chart alone, not because the guest list was complicated, 22 people, but because she wanted everything to tell a story, the story of a family that had arrived somewhere. I arrived 7 minutes late because I'd taken the wrong exit off the 405, and because some part of me always needs a few extra minutes before I walk through a door like that. I'm Nola Vance, and in my family, that has always meant the younger one, the one who freelances, the one who does something with websites that nobody has ever fully understood. My sister Petra, whose engagement party this was, Petra who was marrying a corporate attorney named Brent, had always been the one who made sense to our parents. She went to USC, she got a real job in hospital administration. She met someone stable and ambitious, and she did it in the right order. I moved to Portland at 23 with a laptop and a client list I'd built from scratch. And I had not been forgiven for that, exactly, but I had been tolerated. There she is. My brother-in-law-to-be said when I came through the door, and he said it the way people announce the arrival of someone who was expected to be slightly inconvenient. Warm enough. But noted. My mother found me before I could reach the bar. She squeezed my arm and looked at my dress the way she looks at receipts, checking the total before deciding how to feel. You look tired, she said. I'm fine, Mom. You drove up from San Diego? Portland. I flew. She had already moved on before I finished the sentence. Come say hi to Aunt Roberta. She's been asking about you. I found my seat, not at the main table, that was for immediate family, but at the adjacent foretop with Brent's cousin from Scottsdale, and 2 of Petra's college friends, who spent most of the evening discussing a Pilates studio they were thinking about opening in Laguna Beach. I was used to the foretop. I had been sitting at the foretop my entire life. The real conversation started, as it always did, with my father. My dad, Warren Vance, had spent 30 years building Vance Structural, a mid-size engineering consulting firm that had worked on bridges and commercial developments all over Southern California. He was 61, built like someone who had once played Division II football, and still moved like he remembered it. He had the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance but from having been right more often than he was wrong, and he knew it. He stood up about an hour into dinner and clinked his glass. The room went quiet. They always went quiet for my father. I want to talk about Petra, he said, and I want to talk about this family. He looked at my mother, at Brent, at my sister. He said some things about legacy and about the next chapter. He said he was proud. The room felt exactly the way he wanted it to. Warm, full, his. Then he sat back down, and the table nearest him started talking business. I was close enough to hear. Not included, exactly, but adjacent, which in my family had always been the same thing. The Harmon Bay project is moving, my dad said to my uncle, who ran the financial side of the firm. We break ground in March. Mixed-use waterfront development, 42 units plus commercial. It's the biggest contract we've ever touched. My uncle, my mom's brother Cliff, who had always reminded me of a man who read the fine print on everything, leaned in. Financing solid, working through the last piece. We've got a capital gap between contract signing and the first draw. 30-day window. About 350,000. He said it the way you say a number when you're not worried about it, but you want other people to know you're not worried about it. We've got a private lending group we've worked with before. It's handled. I set down my fork. I could help with that, I said. The table didn't go loud and then quiet. It just went quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't really silence. It's the sound of people deciding how to respond to something they've already categorized as not serious. My dad looked at me. Not unkindly. He had the expression of a man who was about to explain something he assumed he'd explained before. Nola, honey, how much is the gap? Exactly? 350. But this isn't, we're working with institutional lenders on this. There's a whole structure. It's not the same as. He paused. What you do is different. I know what bridge financing is, Dad. Brent reached for his wine glass. My sister looked at her plate. My uncle said, even if the number wasn't the issue, and it might be, you don't mix family money into a deal structure like this. It complicates everything. What your uncle means, my mother said, appearing from nowhere the way she always did in moments like this, her voice perfectly pleasant, is that it's a sweet offer. But you'd be in over your head, sweetheart. My dad looked at me with something I recognized. The patient, careful expression of a man who did not want to embarrass me, but had already decided the conversation was over. We appreciate it, he said. We really do. I picked up my water glass and took a long, slow drink. No offense taken, I said. Then I excused myself to use the restroom and stood in the hallway for 90 seconds and opened my phone. I have a financial advisor named Gwen Takahashi. She has managed my accounts for 5 years. She does not panic. She does not waste words. She was the first person who ever looked at what I'd built and did not ask me if I was sure. I texted her 4 words. Start the Vance review. She texted back too, already running. I went back to my seat and ate my salmon and listened to Brent's cousin talk about golf. Dinner moved the way it always does at events my mother orchestrates. In courses. With careful transitions. With everyone saying the right things at the right times. My dad talked about the Harmon Bay Beige project. My uncle talked about the firm's expansion into Nevada. Petra talked about the wedding venue she and Brent had put a deposit on in Santa Barbara. My mother talked about the florist. At some point my dad mentioned the lending group the raid had been working with. A private outfit, he said. Not the kind of place that ran ads or showed up in Google searches. Just a network of capital that had quietly backed 3 of the firm's last 4 major projects. He spoke about them with the specific reverence people reserve for things they rely on, but couldn't fully explain if someone asked. They've never missed a commitment, he said. 4 years. Every draw on time, no drama. That's rarer than people think. My phone buzzed. A message from Gwen. Your holding structure appears in their cap stack on all 4 projects. Your stake ranges from 18% to 44%, depending on the deal. They don't know. I turned my phone face down on the table. Sounds like a solid group, I said. My dad nodded. The best. Some people just know how to find the right partners. He said it with complete sincerity, looking at Brent when he said it, as though he was offering advice about life. He did not look at me. My dad's phone rang at 9:17. He almost let it go to voicemail. We were mid-toast. Brent's father had stood up and was saying something about 2 families becoming one, something about the Vances being a family he was honored to join. My dad had his glass raised. His phone buzzed once, then again. He glanced at it, and something in his face shifted. He set his glass down and excused himself to the hallway. I heard his voice change before I could hear the words. The room was too loud for that, but my uncle heard it too. I saw him tilt his head, slightly, the way you'd do when you're trying to read a situation from across a room. My dad came back 4 minutes later. He sat down slowly, like a man lowering himself into a chair he wasn't sure would hold him. Something's happened with the lending group, he said. Quiet enough that only the closest people heard it. They're saying there's been a restructuring. They've suspended their position in Harmon Bay. Silence at the immediate table. My uncle's voice was very controlled. Suspended how? They're out, as of tonight. Capital's frozen on their end. He rubbed the back of his neck. We had a signed commitment letter. This shouldn't be possible. My uncle was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling our attorney. Call the bank first. I'm calling both. Petra looked at Brent. Brent looked at his father. My mother's hand went to her throat. A small gesture, barely visible, but I had seen it my whole life and knew exactly what it meant. My sister looked at me from across the table. I don't know what she was looking for. I don't think she knew either. Nola, she said. Do you know anything about this? She wasn't accusing me. She was asking the way you ask someone standing near a window whether they know if it's raining. A little, I said. My dad looked up. The group is called Harborline Capital, I said. They don't advertise. They don't have a website anyone could find. They're structured through a series of LLCs, which is why your attorney has probably spent more time than he'd like trying to figure out who actually owns the underlying fund. My dad's voice was very still. How do you know that? I've followed them for a while. They're one of the most well-capitalized private investment vehicles in Southern California. Real estate focused, primarily coastal markets. Some Pacific Northwest. Total assets somewhere around $580 million. Brent's father had put down his glass. The room had gone very quiet in the way rooms do when something is happening that isn't on the program. My uncle said, nobody researches a private fund that carefully unless they have a reason. What's your reason, Nola? My dad's voice was measured. He was trying to read me the way he'd read contracts for 30 years, looking for the line where the language changed. Check your email, I said. I just sent you something. He picked up his phone. He read the email once, then went back to the top and read it again. His jaw tightened slightly, his hand lowered to the tablecloth. He looked at me the way I had never seen my father look at anything in my life. Like the thing he was seeing did not match the shape of the world he had built. Read it out loud, I said quietly. Harborline Capital Partners, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Ownership summary. Controlling interest, 83%. Primary stakeholder. He stopped. He couldn't finish it. I'll finish it, I said. The room held its breath. Primary stakeholder, Nola A. Vance. Total assets under management, $587 million. No one spoke. My uncle made a sound that wasn't a word. Petra's hand went flat on the table, both palms down, like she needed to press against something solid. Brent stared at me with an expression I had never seen on anyone's face directed at me in my life. My mother stood very still with her hand still at her throat. My dad set the phone down on the tablecloth with extraordinary care. Your Harborline, he said. For 4 years and 3 months, I said. Every project. The silence stretched. Nola. His voice broke slightly on the second syllable. Just slightly. How? This was the part I had been sitting with for a long time. Not rehearsing exactly, but sitting with. Knowing that someday the question would be asked and wanting to be ready to answer it without anger, without score settling, without the heat that had burned off years ago and left something quieter in its place. Something with weight. But not heat. I folded my hands on the table. When I left for Portland at 23, I said, I had $11,000 and a contract with a startup that needed a website rebuilt from the ground up. I finished it in 6 weeks. They referred me to someone else. That someone referred me to 2 more. I wasn't good at marketing myself. I was good at the work. I paused. I landed a client in my second year who was building SaaS products for the property management industry. They paid well. I saved most of it. I started paying attention to where money moved in real estate. Not because I'd planned to invest, but because my clients were investors and I was building the tools they used. After a while, I understood the patterns better than most of the people I was building for. I looked at my dad. I learned from watching you. I don't mean you sat me down and taught me. You didn't. You never thought to. But I grew up listening to you talk about land value, about timing, about when a project was worth the risk and when it wasn't. You have a specific way of thinking about leverage. When to use it, when to walk away. I absorbed it. I don't think you knew I was paying attention. He said nothing. I made my first real estate investment at 26. I made mistakes. I made better ones after. I built the holding structure slowly because I wanted it protected. Structured correctly so it wasn't tied to my name in any obvious way. I paused. I wasn't hiding. I was just being careful. $580 million, Petra said, faint. Almost to herself. 587, I said. My sister looked at me across the table. She had the expression of someone trying to reassemble something they thought they understood. And you invested it in Dad's firm? I invested it in sound projects with a contractor I trusted. The fact that the contractor was my father was relevant, but it wasn't sentiment. Every dollar I put into Vance Structural was a decision I made based on track record, on asset quality, on the specific risk profile of each deal. I kept my voice even. Your firm does good work. I never doubted that. Then why? My uncle said, and then stopped. He was not a man who started sentences he couldn't finish. He restarted. Why pull the position? Why tonight? I let the question sit for a moment. Because tonight, when I offered $350,000 to help close a financing gap, a gap that, relative to where I actually sit, is the equivalent of someone offering you $40 to help cover a parking ticket. The table went quiet the way it goes quiet when someone says something that doesn't quite land. My dad called it theoretical. My uncle said it was too complicated to involve family. I looked at my mother, and someone told me I'd be in over my head. No one spoke. I have been quietly positioned in this firm's capital structure through 2 interest rate cycles, a commercial real estate slowdown, and a supply chain disruption that delayed 3 of your projects by a combined 14 months. I covered the gaps, every time, silently. I kept my voice steady. And tonight at this table, at my sister's engagement party, I was still the younger one who doesn't quite understand how real business works. The candles on the table were very still. My dad put both hands flat on the tablecloth and looked at them. He was a man who knew what he looked like when he was wrong, and he was looking at it now. I want to be clear, I said. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm past angry. I did this because something needed to shift, and I had tried smaller versions of this for years. Dropping hints, mentioning investments in passing, asking to be included in conversations about the firm. You weren't looking. I don't entirely blame you. I know I didn't make it easy to look, but I needed you to actually see me, and I didn't know another way to make that happen. My dad raised his head. Dale Vance, Warren Vance, who had not once in 30 years seen lose his composure in public, looked like a man standing in a room where all the walls had just shifted 6 inches. Nola, he said, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? I asked. Not to be cruel, because it mattered that he knew. He took a breath. For not seeing you. For deciding what you were capable of before you had a chance to show me. For treating your offer tonight like it was. Like you were. He stopped. I have spent 30 years building something I'm proud of, and I never once thought to ask if you wanted to be part of it. That's on me. All of it. Brent's father had gone quiet. The table adjacent to us had gone quiet. The whole room was listening now, and I don't think anyone had made a decision to listen. It was just the kind of conversation that pulls a room into itself. My uncle said, I dismissed you tonight without thinking twice about it. I've done that your whole life, I think, and I didn't know I was doing it. That was worse than if I had. He looked at the table. I'm sorry, Nola. Petra stood up from her chair and walked around the table and crouched down beside mine. She put her hand over mine and didn't say anything for a moment. You built something extraordinary, she said finally, and we made you feel like you had to keep it secret just to be taken seriously at your own family's table. That's not. We need to do better. I need to do better. I looked at her. I looked at all of them. Here's what I want, I said. Not repayment. Not a formal role that gets announced in a press release. I want to be in the room when decisions get made. Not as a silent backer. Not as a courtesy call after the fact. As a voice. I want my perspective to be asked for the same way my uncle's perspective gets asked for. The same way Brent's opinion will get asked for, now that he's joining this family. I want to stop being the person you fill in afterward. I paused. And I want tonight to mean something past tonight. I'm not interested in apologies that expire by morning. My dad stood up. He walked around the table the way he walked onto job sites. Deliberately, like someone who knew where he was going, but was taking the time to get there right. He stood in front of me. You have always had a place in this family, he said. I just never made room for you at the table I was actually sitting at. That ends now. If you want in, you're in. On your terms. He put out his hand. I looked at it for a moment. Then I shook it. I picked up my phone and called Gwen. Restore the Harborline position, I said. Full reinstatement. And I want to add a construction draw for the Harmon Bay project. I'll send you the specs in the morning. Separate from the existing structure. I paused. Yes, tonight. No, I'm sure, thank you. I hung up. The funding will be back in place by Monday, I said. Harmon Bay is a good project. I was going to back it either way. My dad laughed. A real one, surprised out of him. The kind of laugh that comes when something lands differently than expected. You were? You built something worth backing, I said. I just needed you to know who was doing it. Brent's father cleared his throat, and it wasn't uncomfortable. He raised his glass. Well, he said, I have to say, the Vance family is a more interesting family than I realized. The room laughed. And it was the kind of laughter that releases something rather than papers over it. Later, after the plates were cleared, and the candles had burned low, and people had started migrating toward the bar, and the smaller, looser conversations that happen. At the end of events like this, my mother found me standing near the window that looked out over the water. Newport at night, the harbor lights moving on the surface. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just stood next to me. I always knew you were more than what you let people see, she said finally. I just thought you were holding back because you were still figuring it out. I didn't consider that you might be holding back because we hadn't given you a reason to open up. You showed it as worry, I said. All of you did, in different ways. That's what it looks like when people love you and don't know how to make space for a version of you they don't recognize. She was quiet for a long time. I'm going to do better, she said. I know that's easy to say tonight. I'm going to do it, anyway. I leaned my shoulder against hers, just briefly. I know, Mom. The harbor was dark and calm, and somewhere out past the breakwater, the ocean was doing what oceans do, regardless of what happens on land. I had built something real, and I had built it alone, and I had built it in the only way I knew how. Quietly, carefully, one good decision at a time. And tonight, for the first time, the people I had built it beside without their knowing were finally standing in it with me. That was enough. That was actually everything.